comes with a library full of furniture that you can just use and pull into the program. Unfortunately, it's all modern furniture. It's mostly modern office furniture, some modern residential furniture, but really no older furniture. And often when we're drawing set models for the theater, we frequently need older furniture. Sometimes, of course, depending on the show, you need newer furniture, but often you need older furniture, and there really isn't a good place to find examples of older furniture, so you often have to make it yourself. So that's what we're going to be working on in this particular project. So I grabbed this table off a Google search. I searched for an old table. That's where I usually start when I'm building furniture for a model, is with a little bit of research, trying to find a photograph of what the furniture should look like, and then I use the photograph to help me build the 3D model that then I can eventually put into the 3D model of the whole set and populate it. So the couple of things you should be looking out for this week: we're going to be doing extruding, which is the basis of all 3D work in Vectorworks, which we already talked about in the last Vectorworks project. So we'll be doing extruding, we'll be doing plane extruding, we'll also be doing extrude along path. We also will be doing some sweeping. If you remember the sweeping that we did in the first project, it's the virtual version of lathing. We'll be doing that to make the center column here. And we'll be doing one of the Boolean functions. Boolean functions are adding, subtracting, intersecting, and sectioning solids. So that'll make more sense when we do it. But so those are the things that you should be looking out for. And we're also going to talk a little bit about creating a texture this week. We'll create this wood texture to make the table look a little bit more like this one. So I hope you enjoy building this table, and we'll get started. So I'm going to start by opening a new Vectorworks file new. Use my stationery. We're going to be drawing this particular piece in 1-inch scale. Whoops, not in half-inch scale. So we're going to click here on layer scale and select 1 inch so that we're in 1-inch scale. If you don't have this here, if you remember that if you click here on this flyout and make sure that layer scale is turned on, when it is turned on, you'll have the little arrow ruler there rather, and you can click on that and select a scale. So we're going to be in 1-inch scale. So that's step one. Step two is you're going to want to grab the picture of the table that is available in web courses, and like I said earlier, I just decided when I wanted to build a round table for this project this week and just did a Google search to find a picture of a table that I liked. It's important that you find a picture that is a good straight on view as much as possible to build from. That helps a lot if you have a nice straight on view. If it's off at an angle, you can still work with it, but it's just easier if it's a straight on view. So it's really easy on a Mac at least to get the photograph into Vectorworks. You just find the file wherever you have it. I have it on the desktop here, and just drag it in, and it will come up and ask you two options. You can either drag it in as a JPEG or as a PNG. It doesn't really matter. Two different file formats. It doesn't matter which one we're using. JPEG is a smaller format, so we're going to use that. And there it is. If you are working on a PC, I think you may have to do import image file and import it that way. What's this called? Table. No, it's the same deal. I haven't done this on a PC in a while, so it's possible you might be able to just drag it in anyway. But whichever method you use, you need to bring the picture, and we're going to use this as a reference in order to build the table. So the first thing I need to do is scale this photo. We're going to do some tracing. Oh yes, actually, the first thing I should do is save my work. Bert's table project 3. There we go. Always a good idea to save your work. Okay. Where we need to scale this to make it the right size. So how do we know what the right size is? Well, you have to do either a little detective work or you have to have some background knowledge. I happen to know that the general height of all tables is somewhere between 28 and 30 inches. So we're going to make this table right in the middle and make it 29 inches. You also could see if you could find online somewhere the dimensions of the table. If you happen to take the photograph from a furniture catalog, usually it will have the dimensions. I didn't even bother to look to see if the dimensions for this were available because I know how big it is. So we know it's somewhere between 28 and 30 inches tall, so we're gonna make it 29. So what I need to do is scale the photograph here so that it is the right size. This is accurate-ish. Of course, this photograph is in perspective, so it's, in reality, the legs, all four legs are the same height. They sit on the floor, that sort of thing. So it's slightly distorted. You're never going to find a photograph of furniture that isn't distorted to a certain extent. Because all photographs are always in perspective. You might find a drawing of some furniture somewhere that's not distorted. So we have to make sure that we understand what we're doing. So we're going to be looking at 30 inches from this point from this point to this point, the top of the table, it needs to be 30 inches. We're not including this part of the table because of course it's part of the top, and this should be flat, but just by the way photography works, it's not. So I need to scale. So right now this is 4'6", so I need to scale this so that it is 29 inches. So there's a really easy way to do that in Vectorworks. You just select the object and go to Modify, Scale Objects, and select the second option, which is Symmetric by Distance. And what it will do, it will ask you to measure a current distance, and then you can type in a new distance and it will just change it. So select Symmetric by Distance and then click here, and you'll see it says down here, it says click the button to specify the current distance. So okay, so I'm going to click here and I'm going to drag up and I'm going to click here. So I'm going from the bottom of the foot to the top of the table. So it tells me that right now that's 4'6". What I want it to be is 29 inches or 2'5". This happens to be left over because I built this table before the video to make sure I knew how to build it, so it's still left over from the last time I used it. But we'll type that in, 29 inches. Okay, which is the same thing as 2'5". So we'll just hit OK, and it automatically scales this. And now if we use the tape measure tool, we'll see that if we measure from here to here, it is 2'5". So far so good. So the next thing I need to do is to create this center pedestal. It helps if I have a vague idea of how big this pedestal is. So I know the whole table is going to be 29 inches tall. I'm curious to see what this distance is. If I just, now that it's scaled, if I just measure it, it's coming out at about 7.8. I'm just going to check that and make sure that it's right by doing a Google search. And I happen to, so I'll just go backwards here. So I searched pedestal table leg, and the very first thing that came up was this. I went to view the page to discover this leg. I actually wanted to know the size of the leg first, and if I discover that the leg is 10 by 12, this is just sort of a standard table leg, so I want to remember that. But I found out, oh look, they're unfinished table parts, so it's got more parts. Hey look, there are the columns. So they look like they're about 23 inches tall, and this one looks an awful lot like this one in terms of proportion. So it looks like it's 8 inches in diameter, so 23 by 8 roughly, and the foot was 10 inches tall and 12 inches wide, so that's good to know. So I'm going to, before I go into 3D, I'm going to do a little quick 2D drawing of this to make sure that I sort of have proportions of things right. So the width of this table should be, a table like this should be somewhere between 3 feet and 4 feet. That's the general size of them. So if I measure here, it turns out that it is, oh look, it's 3'4". So that is between 3 feet and 4 feet, so that's good. And it looks like the top is about an inch thick, and the apron here is about 2.5 inches thick, and it probably overhangs about an inch because that's pretty normal. Okay, so those are some numbers that I know. So I'm going to draw a rectangle that is, what do we say, 3 feet 4, so 40 inches, 1 foot high, 1 inch high rather. So there's the top, and then the skirt we said was 2.5 inches tall, 2.5, and it's an inch smaller than the top on either side. So I can just, and you'll notice the dimension for the top is still there because it's the last thing I use. I can just type -2 here, which will subtract 2 inches or 1 from either side, and click OK. And there's the skirt. I'm going to grab that here. This is not part of the modeling. This is just me laying this out in 2D to make sure that I know what size everything is before I start modeling it. So just so that we're clear. And then we discovered that this is about 24 inches by 8 inches. So I'm going to make a rectangle that's 8 inches wide and 23 inches tall. Okay. And it's going to sit right there. And I'm going to draw a line here on the top of the table and then move it down because there's some space, some unspecified space between the bottom of the pedestal and the floor. So I'm going to move my line, modify move, down 29 inches, -29. Okay. So there we have that. And then we said that the feet were 12 inches wide and 10 inches tall. So somewhere along in there. All right, so that should give us a rough idea of how big the table is. Now, if you're probably saying to yourself, this doesn't look much like a foot, and this doesn't look much like a pedestal. Well, we're gonna fix that. So what we're gonna do first is we're going to create this foot. I'm gonna do that like this. I'm gonna use the 2D polygon tool, and I'm going to trace this foot and use that as a guide. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a straight line right here because of course in reality this foot sits flat on the floor. Because this photograph is in perspective, it looks like it's not sitting here on the floor. So we have to realize that we're going to trace this, but then we have to do some modifications to it because we're not looking straight at it. Unfortunately, we don't have a straight on view, so we kind of have to use some judgment here. But here's how we're going to start. So we're going to use the 2D polygon tool. I'm going to start here. I'm going to drag over to here, which is where the foot would end if it were actually touching the floor. And then I'm going to what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to trace it by literally tracing it, because that's going to leave me with a lot of control points, and I want in 3D to have as few control points as possible. So watch what happens here. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to come over to where this intersection would be, right there, and then I'm going to start looking for curves. I'm going to discover that there's a curve right here, and then there's another curve, and then there's a third curve. So I'm going to click everywhere where it curves, it changes direction. So right here it curves up, and then right along in here it starts curving down again. So this is the down, so I clicked right there. So this is the down again, and then right about here it starts curving up again. And if this doesn't make sense, it will in a minute. So I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to come up here and go there. Then I'm going to hold down Shift so that I can go straight up to the top of it. then I'm going to look for curves again. So I've got this curve here, and then right about here, it starts switching direction again. And then right about, say, here's another curve, right about here, it starts switching direction again, and then eventually it ends up back here where I started. So I have this shape, which you're probably saying to yourself doesn't look much like the leg, but we're going to fix that. So the first thing I'm going to do is make this not solid so that I can actually see what I'm doing. So there's my shape. Now I'm going to use the reshape tool to actually add curves in to these line segments or polygonal segments. So I'm going to add curve, and in this particular case I'm going to choose the second one, which is Bezier, and I'm going to click here and I'm going to drag until I sort of match the curve there, and then this one I'm going to pull down. And when I'm paying sort of special attention to make sure that this is a relatively smooth transition here, and that is, see, there's a little bit of a glitch in it there, so I'm going to choose the move polygon handle mode of my reshape tool here so that I can do a little bit more reshaping. I'm going to change the pitch of that curve slightly so that it's a smoother transition there. Then I'm going to go back to add curve mode to come down here and add this curve. I'm exaggerating that a little bit because I know that if you look at these, the curve comes out and then curves back. So I want to make sure that I get, and that's a really classic detail of these legs. So I want to make sure I get that in. So now I'm going to take this and create that curve, and then I'm going to do this and create the next. And once again, this is a little wonky here, but I'll come back and adjust it. And then I'm going to take this one and curve up like that. And so that's a pretty smooth transition. I'm going to go back here to the reshape tool and work on this one a little bit so that it's smoother. There, okay, there, that's nice and smooth. Okay. So now this shape looks more like we would expect. So now I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it down here, and I'm going to, let's see, I just turned on my snapping off, and I actually needed to leave it on. And you'll say, well, that's interesting. It worked up here, but now it doesn't fit into this size that we said it needed to be. We also remember that we talked about that this photograph is distorted because it's taken from slightly above the table and it's in perspective. So what we're going to do is kind of force this into that shape like that. Pull it out just a little bit more. Okay, so we use this as a guide. This is what it looks like from 45-degree angle sort of, but this is a closer representation of what it looks like sort of straight on. So if I take that, and actually I can use the mirror tool. Like holding down shift, and there we go. Then I can delete this and delete that. So that's a closer representation of what the legs actually look like. Make those solid. So then the next thing I need to do is create this pedestal. And even though I'm doing this in 2D, I will be using these 2D shapes to eventually go back and create my 3D shapes. So bear with me. So the pedestal is appears to be at least symmetrical. It's top around the side, so it's symmetrical left and right, and it also is probably symmetrical-ish top and bottom, except for that the top of this is cut off by the top of the table. But so what I'm going to do is try to strike the center here. I'm going to find the center of the column, which looks like it's right there, and draw a straight. I'm holding down shift and draw a straight line down so that I can only draw half of this this column. And then the other thing I'm going to do is try to find the center of the bulge here, and I'm going to draw a line there. So what I'm going to do is draw the shape of this lower quarter basically of the pedestal, and then use that as a guide to create the rest of it. So to work on this lower quadrant, what I'm going to do is create some guidelines from where the curves happen right here on the center line. I'm gonna create guidelines like this. Let me just do it, then I'll explain. So the top of there are two beads here, right? So the top of the top bead is right there. The bottom of the bottom bead is right there. The top of where the sort of see this gap, this space here, where there's sort of the flat face is, and you'll notice that it's, even though I just happen to know that they're identical, it's bigger here than it is here because of the distortion of the photograph. So I'm going to cheat it a little bit. I'm going to cheat this one up slightly. I'm going to cheat this one down slightly. Then this is going to be the bottom. And I also know that this part of the pedestal and this part of the pedestal are identical, even though you kind of can't see this curve that's happening in here. So I'm going to duplicate these two lines. I'm going to drag them over here, and then I'm going to put them down here. I account for the curve, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and I'm nudge all of this down like that, which is going to make the whole thing slightly longer than it is in this drawing, but I know that it's in perspective, and it, it gets smaller as it goes back, so this is all going to work out. So now what I'm going to do is, so to make clear what's going on here, because of the perspective, there's a curve here, which in reality is really a straight line. So this point appears to be up here, but it's really down here. If I look at because this point, the top of this curve, this point, the top of this curve, they're the same line, but because of the perspective of the photograph, it's farther back in the distance here. So when I'm tracing this, I can't just trace it. I have to draw the shape bearing in mind that I have to make adjustments so that this portion right here actually takes up this whole space. These two curves take up this whole space, if that makes sense. So that's why I drew these guidelines in. So now I'm going to take my polygon tool. I'm going to start down here. I'm going to go up to here. I'm going to come over to where the widest point here is. And then I've got a curve out and a curve in, but I have to make it bigger so that the curve out goes to about right here, and the curve in goes to about right here. It just happens that it also seems to correspond with, in the photograph, with this shape here, but that's not really what that shape is. Of course, this curve is really down here. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to skip over these two curves for a second. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and come straight down. I'm going to angle out from here towards right here is the edge of the pedestal. If you zoom out, you can see that where it's light and dark, right where the light and the dark meet is actually the edge of the pedestal. So I'm going to angle out to there. I'm going to click. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and come straight down. And now it's really starting to get distorted down here. But I know that the top of this and the bottom are identical. So I'm going to hover over here until this point turns red, and I'm getting my green dashed line, so I can come down here like that. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and come straight down, and then come back over and make the closed surface. I'm going to select none so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to select the reshape tool. I'm going to add curve. It should be familiar for the legs. Then this is going to come out. This is going to go in like that. I'm trying to make this a nice smooth transition. Skip over this for a minute. This curves up like so. This is the mirror image of it. It's down like that. And then I'm going to go back and account for these 3 beads. These two should be identical, so that's why I skipped over them with that. I'm gonna use the circle tool. So I'm gonna select circle, I'm gonna go to diameter mode here, I'm gonna find the center of this line segment, and I'm gonna draw that circle, and then I'm gonna draw that circle, and then I'm gonna go down here, and I'm gonna draw that circle. So then I can select all 4 things, the 3 circles, and the overall object, and do a modify add surface, and I can delete these guidelines, and you should see that even though it's stretched a little bit, but this shape corresponds with this shape. If I drag it over here so that it's actually on the center line, you can see that it lines up better. So now I have this shape, and I'm going to mirror this shape using the mirror tool. I'm going to click here and click there. There we have a mirroring of it. Modify add surface. So now I have half the shape. It's a little funky here in the middle. So I'm going to use the reshape tool, and I'm going to subtract this point that's in the center, and you'll see how that cleans that up and makes it rounder. Then I can bring this down here, and look, that seems like that fits pretty well. If I were to mirror this, oops, let's try that again. Select this, mirror tool, click here, click there. Alright, then I can get rid of the pedestal, square. I'm going to duplicate one of these, because what I really want is the half of it. And I'm going to add these together, modify, add surface, and make it solid. Send this to front. Just so that we can sort of verify that this looks right, I'm going to draw these lines across here. So if I were drawing a 2D version of this table, if this were last semester, this is what this would look like. I'm spending time on this because I'm going to use these same shapes. So you'll see that starts to, and I'm just going to kind of fake in here where if I were drawing this for real in 2D, I'd want to go back and measure. Make sure that this was right, but something like that, right? Okay, so whoops, here is our sort of 2D version of the table, and hopefully we can agree that that looks like a pretty good representation of the table. So now that we've drawn all these 2D shapes, we're going to use these to pretty easily turn them into 3D shapes that we can use to create the table. I know that what I did here, tracing this, was a little weird, and it's not as easy as just tracing it because of the distortion of the photograph. So you'll see it's slightly off from just a straight trace. But hopefully what I did there makes sense. If it doesn't, track me down and I'll try to explain it better. But the basic idea, and I'm trying to be really precise here, what I'm more interested in than you getting it absolutely precise is that you understand the principle of what's going on here. So hopefully that made sense. All right, so the other thing I need to do is cut this off. So because it goes into the table and it really shouldn't do that. So I'm gonna keep my original half here. I'm gonna put it there. I'm gonna draw a line here, and then use that line selected along with this to clip surface, modify clip surface, which will leave me with just that. So with the top part of it here, as you can see there, has been cut off. I'm going to also get rid of that line. All right, so that is the 2D part, and now we'll move along to the 3D part. So for the 3D part, I'm going to start with the hard part first. I'm going to create the pedestal, which actually really isn't that hard, but I have a lot of the work done already. I have this shape already drawn. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I haven't paid any attention to, because I've been working only in 2D, I haven't paid any attention so far as to what view I'm in, but now I want to be in front view, and I'm in top view. So I'm going to switch to front, and you'll notice that everything disappeared. Well, that's unfortunate. That's because all of this stuff was drawn as in layer plane, or we talked about these plane things. So if I just put them all in screen plane, then now they've come back. So even though I'm in front view, they are in screen plane, and if no matter how much I rotate around, nothing happens. So front view. So the first thing I'm going to do is sweep this shape into this shape. So I'm just going to select it, model, sweep. I'm going to leave everything set to the default, so I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to go into OpenGL so you can see what it actually looks like. And that looks strange. I wonder what's going on there. What's going on there is I forgot to make it solid before I swept it, so I can just make it solid now. So there we go. All right. So this looks similar to this. Only you'll notice we have a problem here with the top and bottom of this are octagonal, and here they're round. I know this is an octagon and not a hexagon. I almost said pentagon. I know it's 8 and not 6, even though I only see 3 of them, because I know that there are 4 legs and there's one face between each leg. So four blank faces, 4 faces with legs. So it has to be an octagon. But I can't sweep this octagon part because I can only sweep things that are continuously round. I don't have any way of sweeping a flat face like that. So I've swept it as if it were round, and then I'm going to cut it. I'm going to slice it so that I'm left with this octagonal shape here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to top view, and I'm going to choose my regular polygon tool. I'm going to tell it the number of sides. It's still set to 8 from the last time I did this, but I want it 8-sided, and I want to do the inscribed mode so that I go from the center to a corner, not the circumscribed mode from a center to an edge, because I need the corner. So I'm going to click here. I'm drawing this, and I'm just going to pull it out until it touches the edge. So there's my octagon. This is the shape at the top of the bottom that I want to be left with. So I need to subtract this part of the swept shape. So what I need to do is going to be a little counterintuitive for a minute. So I've drawn the octagon. Now I'm going to draw a circle using the center of the octagon, and whoops, but I have to make sure that my circle is in radius mode. So I'm going to draw here, and I'm going to make a circle that's bigger than the rest of the objects. It doesn't matter how big it is, it just needs to be bigger than the rest of the objects. So there. Now I'm going to send that to back so I can find my octagon. I'm going to select the octagon and the circle. I'm not selecting all 3 objects, I only want the 2 2D objects. And then I'm going to do a modify clip surface, which will cut the octagon away from the circle. It's still there. It doesn't remove it. It doesn't delete it. It just cuts it out. So I have to select it and hit delete in order to remove it. So now what I have is this shape that's a circle with an octagonal hole in the middle of it. So now I can do this. Now I can do an extrude, model extrude. I'm just going to randomly pick 12 inches. I'm not quite sure exactly how tall it is. You'll see what's going on in a minute, and click OK. And if I go to front view, you'll see that I have this shape. Actually, let me go to OpenGL so you can really see what's going on here. So I have this shape. It looks like a socket wrench for those of you who are mechanically inclined. So it's a cylinder with a hexagonal hole in the middle of it. I'm going to get back to front. I'm actually going to go back to wireframe. Okay, so I'm going to move this down and line it up so that the center of it here sits right here. It's at the bottom of this curve. So click there, and I'm going to make a copy of it. So now I'm going to go into isometric so that you can see what's going on. So I've got this piece sitting on top of this piece. Now what I want to do is subtract this from this, which will have the effect of cutting off the 8 of the faces of the circle to turn it from a circle or cylinder into a hexagonal solid. So I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to do model subtract solids, which is the 3D version of Clip Surface. Clip Surface will not work here. Clip Surface only works on 2D objects. Subtract solids only works on 3D objects. They do essentially the same thing. So subtract solids, then it's going to ask me to select object, and what it's asking me for is to select the object that I want to be left with. Select the object that I'm subtracting from, and that object will be highlighted in red. You'll notice I can select, if I had multiple objects here, you can page through them sort of by using the arrow tool. So when I click here, this means that I would be subtracting this object from this object, which is not what I want. What I want is to subtract this object from this object. So I have the one that I want to be left with selected in red, and I'm just going to click. And I also, if I wanted to, I could retain subtracting objects. If you click this, then it works exactly like Clip Surface. Both of them will be left after I click OK, and then I could delete this one or move it away. If you don't retain this subtracting objects, it will subtract it from the other one and also delete it, which is really what I want to do. So I'm going to click OK, and look what happened. Now I have my octagon, and because and I'm going to go to higher OpenGL options. We're going to go to high so that we can actually see what's going on better. But this is an interesting shape here. It's a very common furniture shape, and it actually is a little weird to model. Well, that's why we drew the curve when we drew the curve right here, and you might not have understood why is he drawing a curve there. I don't see what's going on. Well, now hopefully you see what's going on. So now this looks much more like this. Now it's turned at a different angle. We're looking straight at this one, we're not looking straight at this one. So when we do the bottom and I turn it, it'll make more sense. But so now I'm just going to do the same thing to the bottom. So I had already duplicated this socket wrench that we created so that I can use it to subtract from the bottom. So I'm going to go back to wireframe just so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to drag this down here. And you'll notice I haven't really been paying attention. I'm only worried about left and right and up and down, because where I originally drew this in the top and it was lined up, because I haven't moved it in the top view at all, even though it might be over here somewhere, it still is lined up perfectly with where it was in terms of front to back in top view. So if I go back to front, so I can move it around wherever I want here, and it's still going to be lined up with the center of the piece in terms of front to back, i.e. towards the screen or away from the screen. It's not moving there. So so where I'm going this time is I want to subtract, I want to start it up here. So we're going to grab it by its center, going to move it to there. It shouldn't affect anything else, but if I'm worried about it, I could do that. OpenGL so I can see what's going on. I'm going to go to isometric. I just hit 3 on my keyboard in case you're wondering. So I'm going to select both of these things and then model, subtract solids. And you'll notice this time it selected the wrong one. It guesses, and 50% of the time it guesses wrong. So I don't want to be left with the socket wrench. I want to be left with the this piece. This is a little confusing because you'll notice it looks different now than it did before. Before, when it was highlighting the piece in red, it actually was highlight all of the individual faces. Well, now this is highlighting this cube because when I subtracted the top, this original piece was just a sweep. Now it's a subtracted solid. It's the sweep minus the other thing. So it's actually a different. I'm going to cancel it for a minute. Now this says solid subtraction. Before it said sweep. So the solid subtraction, it thinks of it as this cube volume. So that's why it's looking different with the red. So I'm going to select both of those, model, subtract solids. So make sure that it's that one that's selected, and then click OK. And now we've got that. So let's look at our front view. And now let's do this. I'm going to rotate this so that there's a flat face. So I'm going to click here. I could do the math to figure out how much to rotate it, but not in the mood. So I'm going to click there, then I'm going to click here. I'm going to hold down Shift, drag this up like that. So now it's turned straight towards us. And front. I don't need to do that for the modeling. The only reason I'm doing that is so that I can do this, so that I can show you that this really does look like that. It'll be easier to see if I go into OpenGL options and tell it to draw edges and change the crease angle to like 25. The crease angle, if you put this at 0, if you put it at 1, let's try to see if I can get it to actually. The lower it is, the more wireframe-like the object will look. Because you'll see it starts to draw all the little individual wireframe-like. So if we actually go into wireframe, well, actually that's a bad example. You can't really see it, but you kind of have to trust me on this. That the crease angle, the lower it is, the more of the internal sort of wireframey structure that it shows. The higher it is, the less of that it shows. But you have to hit a happy medium so that it shows enough. And that's what we have, 25. Whoops, wrong one. We don't want that. So 25, okay. All right. So now you can see that this looks very much like this. They're a pretty good match for each other. So there's step 1. All right, step 2, we're going to draw the tabletop. This is actually quite easy. This is 2 extruded circles. So we're going to go to the top. We're going to remind ourselves that this first one is 3 feet 4. So I'm going to go to the circle tool. I'm going to make sure I'm in drawing by radius mode. I'm going to click in the center here. I'm going to drag out and hit tab and I want the length half of 3 feet 4, which is 20 inches. Half of 3 feet is 18 inches, and half of 4 is 2, and 18 plus 2 is 20. Okay, so 20 inches. All right, so let's see if that worked. 3 feet 4, look at that. Then that's the top, and then we remember the bottom one was an inch smaller on either side. So I can either draw another circle that is 18 inches, so sorry, 19 inches, or I can do this. I'm going to use the offset tool. I'm going to offset by 1 inch. If I just leave all the defaults selected, if I click here, if I click on the inside, it offsets it by an inch towards the inside. If I click on the outside, it offsets it to the outside. I actually want the inside, so I'm going to select here, then I'm going to click there. So now I have this one is an inch smaller. It's actually 2 inches smaller, but if you center it, there's an inch there. So now I'm just going to extrude this, the bigger one, model extrude 1 inch. Okay, and this one, remember, is 2.5 inches. So I'm going to extrude this, model extrude 2.5. Okay, then I go to front view, and they both extruded up, so I have to do a little bit of rearranging. So I'm just going to grab the top, grab it by its center, and make sure to put it on top. I'll go ahead and group those together, and then I can drag them both down by the center and line them up with the center there. And if we go to OpenGL and ISO, you can see what's happening there. Okay, so far so good. Back to front. Now I'm going to look at this detail in the table, and you'll notice that it's routed. It's got a simple cove route on it, so I need to route out the top of the table. There is no routing tool in Vectorworks, but what we're going to do is we're going to use subtract solids again, and then we're going to create a positive shape that wraps around the table that we're going to subtract from the table in order to create this route. This is where we're going to use extrude along path. So I'm going to go to isometric so I can see what I'm doing. Move this out of the way. I'm going to double this. I grouped this, so in order to get back to it, I'm just going to double click on it to get myself into the group. So now I'm back to just this extrude. And what I need to do is create a path that is the same circle as this edge of the table. And I can do that in a couple different ways. The easiest way is just to draw another circle. And since I happen to be in 3D here, I'm going to make sure something's working. Oh, okay. So this is in automatic mode now. Just want to make sure why automatic mode wasn't there 2 seconds ago when I clicked on it. It should have been. I may have had to. It may have been because I brought this up. But I want to be in automatic mode, and you'll notice now this is turning purple. What automatic mode does is it makes sure that you're on the working plane of a particular object. And what the working plane is, it's not the X plane or the Y plane or the Z plane. It's the plane of whatever is purple. So I want to be on the plane of the tabletop. So as I draw this circle, I want to use center radius mode. I'm going to click here in the center, and then oops, it didn't. I'm going to click face. So I'm going to just draw that circle that coincides with the top of the table. Now I'm going to draw another circle that so I'm going to go back. Whoops! I'm going to go back to front here, and you'll see that that circle coincides there. I need to figure out how big my route is going to be. I'm going to sort of do a little guessing. It looks so it's either going to be, you know, router bits come in standard sizes, so it's either going to be 1/2 an inch or 5/8 of an inch, or it looks like actually 3/4 of an inch, 0.75 is about the right right amount to route out. So I'm going to draw this as a 0.7 radius circle. I don't have to draw it here, I can draw it anywhere. I just chose to draw it here because this lets me sort of look and see that it's the right size and shape. I could make any shape I wanted to here. If I wanted to do an OG route or any kind of shape, it doesn't have to be a circle, it can be any shape. Just because the table that we're copying happens to have a cove route, we're just using the simple circle. So I'm going to go back to ISO. You don't have to do this in isometric, you can do it in any view. I'm just doing it in isometric so you can see what's actually going on. So I want to select this circle and this circle, and I'm going to do a model extrude along path. It is going to ask me to select a path object. This is the same red deal that was going on with the subtract solids. So if you click next, you'll see what happens. The path is the path that the shape that you want to extrude along. The profile is not the path, so you want to make sure that the path is selected red, not the profile. Other than that, you can leave everything here the same. We'll talk about later in the semester what these things do. You actually might just want to play with this and sort of see what these do. Exponential scale will make it get bigger as it goes around. If you can get interesting effects by locking the planes and fixing the profiles and stuff. But normally you just want to do just a normal extrude along path. So you have both objects selected, extrude along path, make sure that the path is highlight and red, and click OK, and it creates that shape. You can see what it did there. It's basically like wrapped a rubber hose around the table. So if I go to front view, you'll see what's happening here. If I wanted to, instead of subtracting from the table, if I wanted to add a bump, you know, if the table was going to be round or have some other shape, I could do the same thing here by creating that shape and adding it to the table. But in this particular case, I want to subtract it. So I'm going to select the extrude and the tabletop both together, and then I'm going to do another subtract solids model. Subtract solids. I'm going to make sure that it's really hard to tell in this view. Okay, so that's not it. This is it. I want to make sure that the tabletop is selected as the retaining object, and click OK, and you'll see what happened here. So I created this routed effect by subtracting that from my tabletop. I'm going to exit, and so we're getting closer. So there we have the pedestal, the tabletop with its skirt, and now we just have to add the legs. So we're going to go to front so that we can see what's going on. Fortunately, the legs are really easy. They're just plain old extrudes with a little bit of a finishing touch. But so I'm going to bar this shape. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm just going to extrude it. This, I kind of just have to know that this is somewhere around 2 inches. I could look it up online and see if I could find. Let me see. Do I still have it? Let's see if it says how big these are. It doesn't tell me what the. Oh, yes, it does. 2.25 inches. So, like I said, somewhere around 2 inches. So, I'm gonna. 2.5 seems really thick to me. I'm gonna make it 2 inches. So, model, extrude, 2 inches. Well, our research there said 2.25, so I'll go ahead and do it 2.25. And just to go into ISO, whoops, into ISO, so you can see what's going on. All right, so there's that. You'll notice if you look closely that this is got a little bit of a rounded over edge to it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. New tool, bring up the tool sets, click here on 3D modeling, find fillet edge, select it. You may have to play with this a little bit to get the right radius. Actually, let me do it wrong first so you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to 1/4 inch. You select. You see this is turned red, and an edge or multiple edges. So I'm going to hold down Shift and keep selecting edges. And then when I have what I want selected, if I hit the arrow, it will. You see what it does? It just rounds over the edge there. It's a little bit too big. It's too, I think, it's too rounded. It's not nearly that rounded here, so we're going to undo that. All right, we're going to do that again. Fillet edge. We're going to go back to 1/8. If it's not giving you, if you're, I'm just hovering over an edge here and it's turning red. If that's not happening for you, if you click here, make sure that you do not have select faces selected. If you have select faces selected, it will select the entire face. And the problem with that is I do not want to round over this edge, and I do not want to round over this edge. I want to do all the other edges, but I don't want to do this edge, the where it meets the table, and I don't want to do the bottom. I want those to be nice and square. So I don't want to use select face. I need to unselect that and leave everything else unselected and manually select here, here, here. So I'm going to do the top edge and the bottom edge, and then also the other side. And if I use the Option key to select back faces, so I'm going to hold down Option on a Mac. It's Command, I think, on a PC, and you'll notice that it's turning red here. So I have those 6 edges selected. I wonder if I have to Option Shift. Yep, I have to hold down Shift too. So Option and Shift to select. Shift lets me keep selecting, and so these should all be red. I let go of Shift and I shouldn't have. Alright, so there we go. And then click OK, and it should have rounded over all of the edges, and it did. Very good. If the option thing is confusing, you can always do one side, and then by selecting just the 6, the 3 on the top and the 3 on the bottom, and then whoops, hello, just got lost. If you ever get lost in 3D, if you hit here, or actually if you get lost anywhere, it'll sort of take you, assuming that you're started in the middle of the page somewhere, it'll kind of take you back to the center. Then we're going to go back to front. I could always do one side and then orbit around into the other side. Here's something good to know. If you have this selected and you use the flyover tool, there are several different modes here. The one you usually want is this one, which lets you orbit around. If you have something selected, it lets you orbit around the thing that you have selected. You'll see it's giving me this little indication of the axes here. If you have this one selected, it orbits around the center of the page, wherever 0, 0 is. So it's orbiting around that. Sometimes you can get lost. So you'll see it here. Here's where it is. It's at. It's interesting that it's off from 0. But usually what you want is this one, so that you can orbit around the one that you want. Okay, so I'm going to go back to front. I'm going to line this up. I'm going to grab it by its center and line it up with the center of the face here. and I want to go to top view and make sure that I do the same thing. So I grab it by its center and line it up with the center there. So back to here. You notice whenever I go to top view, it automatically switches back to wireframe. So I'm going to go back to top view, and so now that I have this leg made, I'm going to turn it into a symbol. Whenever you have multiple versions of the same thing, it's always good practice to not make copies of them, but to turn them into symbols and then make copies of the symbol. So it's very easy. Select it, modify, create symbol. I'm going to call it table leg. Okay, it's going to ask you where to put it. You want to put it in the same place. It will default to put it in the same place the overall file is. Click OK. And so now it's a 3D symbol. So I will duplicate array, or duplicate array, depending on whether you think of it as a noun or a verb. So you select the one, edit, duplicate array. I want to do a circular array because I want to lay out the legs around the center column. I want to make 3 copies. There, of course, are 4 legs. I already have 1, so I need to make 3 more. The angle between them is 90 degrees, so there's going to be 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 90 degrees. I want it to place them around the next place. I want to tell it where to duplicate them around, and I want that to be the next mouse click. And importantly, I want it to rotate the duplicates, not just let me show you what happens if you don't rotate the duplicates. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to click OK. I get this bullseye target. I'm going to click there, and you'll see what it did. It laid them out around there, but it did not rotate them. It's not useful. Occasionally you want it to do that, but usually you don't. So edit duplicate array, tell it to rotate the duplicates, and this time when I click here, it does what I expected. Now we have our table. So the next step is we need to apply a texture to it to make it look like the wood table. There are lots of wood textures built into Vectorworks. Unfortunately, none of them match this table, but we're going to select this and go to Object Info. It's going to run through some of the ones so you can see what it looks like, the built-in ones. Object Info, and we've been using Shape for the last semester and the last couple weeks, and we're going to have a new tab now. We're going to go to Render, and there's a drop-down menu that has lots of textures in it. These are all textures. So if I wanted to make this into I don't know, a table made out of grass. Boy, that's weird. So there you have it. So we wanted a chrome table. Chrome, reflective metals are really tricky in Vectorworks and really in any modeling program because there's nothing currently for it to reflect. It's basically in this blue vacuum. So the thing that makes chrome look like chrome is that it reflects the things around it, but there's nothing for it to reflect here. So probably brass would be a better solution. And once again, it's not. So at any rate, there's no wood, or there's only one wood, European cherry, which doesn't really look right. So we are going to create our own texture. So we're going to go to Resource Browser, going to New Resource, RenderWorks Texture. Right, it's going to bring this up. Texture, we're going to call this Table Wood. And lots of options here. The one we're going to use, the two that we're going to use, are color and reflectivity. So color, this is where you can set it to a color. You can pick a color. You can set it to some of the different shaders here. They're bricks. There are other things, which is different than having an image of bricks. We'll get into this more later, but I want this project to have a texture. So what we're going to use is the color is actually going to be an image. I've in WebCourses there's a file I've found this table is, at least to me, it appears to be oak. So I grabbed oak texture and did a little Photoshop to it to make it match this table, and I've dropped it into WebCourses so you can download that and use it as the image. So image, you want to import an image file. You're going to select the file that is oak texture. That's the one from WebCourses that I photoshopped. Open, leave everything else here the same, and you'll see that it fills in this preview sphere with the texture. Through a little trial and error, I discovered earlier what size this should really be, but I'm going to show you a couple different sizes, and so we're going to try 48 inches. What this means is this is how large that actual one image would be on the table. It's set to repeat infinitely, but one copy of it would be 48 inches square, if that makes sense. So we're going to click OK, and then now that we have the table selected, we can just double click here and it will mostly change to the texture. This texture is a little, the reason the legs didn't change is because they are components. Sorry, that's SketchUp. They are symbols. In order to change a symbol, you have to actually edit the symbol. So I'm going to double click here, and it's going to ask me which part to edit, and I'm going to edit the 3D component. Edit. And now I can double click there, and then up here, exit symbol. Alright, so now all four legs have got the right texture, although it looks really big. The grain is huge here. So I am going to tell it to, I'm going to edit the texture itself. So in Resource Browser, here, edit. It turns out that 24 is actually better than 48, at least to my eye. So that looks better. We're gonna put this for a second in Final Quality RenderWorks because it's gonna look better. Still possible that maybe that's too. Oh, the top looks pretty good. That may be a little too grainy. Still, we might want to go down. Let's see what happens if we edit it again and do 12 inches. Yeah, that's starting to look too. That's I've gone too far in the other direction now. So maybe 18 inches. I actually think 24 looked better. So we're going to go back to where we started, 24. The other thing that you'll notice is that this table is shiny and this table is not. So I need to add some varnish into the table. So I'm going to edit this texture again. And I'm going to reflectivity, and I'm going to choose plastic. I'm choosing plastic not because the table is supposed to look like plastic, but these are types of reflections. If you choose mirror, it will act like a mirror and actually reflect anything else that's in the virtual room with it. That we have nothing else for it to reflect. There's some other things here, but plastic is sort of the, see what happens here. It's basically adding a sheen, a varnish to it. So let's set that to plastic and click OK. And now that starts to look more like it's supposed to. A couple of things. The wood is going in the wrong direction on this pedestal. It should be going up and down if you think about the way it's built, and it's going left and right. So here I'm going to select just the pedestal, and I'm going to rotate. You can actually watch it happen. See what's going on there? I'm going to rotate it so that it's 90 degrees. I could just type in 90, but I wanted you to see what was happening. Now here is an unfortunate thing in modeling with Vectorworks. You'll notice that now it's going in the right direction, top and bottom, but it's going in the wrong direction in the center. That's just a fault of the program. Whenever you have something that's made up of compound shapes like this, it doesn't really have a good way. I could try to set this to a different mapping scheme and see if it makes it better. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to OpenGL because it's faster. And then instead of doing perimeter, if we do cylinder, okay, maybe set this to 90. Cylinder, of course, is made to wrap texture around a cylinder. I don't know if that looks better or not. It's all kind of going in the same direction now, but I do not think that's an improvement. I think that looks weird. So I'm going to change it back to perimeter and change the rotation back to 90. All right, so we're close here. If you remember the one that I originally showed you when we very first started, you'll say to yourself, this one looks more realistic than that one does. There's some stuff missing, and it mostly has to do with lighting. So the first thing is there are no light sources currently, and there's just the one sort of fake light source that's always there unless you put in another light source so that you can see. So we're going to add a light or two in. So top plan here, light, add a sun there. Needs to be pointing towards the table. Alright, so let's see what that does. I already know it's not going to be right, but I'll look at it. Alright, so final quality, well, kind of dark. You can tell from the reflection of this table that whatever's lighting it is a pretty low light source. So I actually need to go back. But, yeah, well, I was going to say, but the table looks more realistic now. So if we go to front, look at this sun, I'm going to flatten the angle a lot there, or like that. Now if we go to Final Quality RenderWorks, alright, that's looking better. Still, this one is better lit than this one, so I need some light coming from the other direction. So we're going to do this, back to top. I'm going to duplicate the sun, flip it, put this one over here, and set this one to not cast shadows. And also we're going to make it less bright, 75%. So now if we go to front, if you look at OpenGL, it's just going to be brighter. In Final Quality RenderWorks, it's going to be better. Just angle that a little bit so that it's okay. Then there's a final step. There's something called ocular occlusion, which basically deals with, for lack of a better, sort of darkening around the edges of things. View lighting options. I'm going to make sure, did I just say ocular? Of course I meant ambient occlusion. Turn that on. And that helps it to look more realistic. Oh, don't want to do that. I was trying to move the whole thing, but I had not grouped it together. So there we go. All right. So I'm going to group that together. And there we have our table. And it should look like our table. It needs to be turned at a different angle to match the photograph, so we're going to rotate it 45 degrees to the left in top view, modify, rotate, actually 45 degrees in either direction, doesn't matter, left or right. Front. Tilt. Final quality. It still looks a little bit wonky if you stare at it long enough because this is in perspective and this isn't. So we can put it into normal perspective. Now it's off in space somewhere. Going to use the flyover tool again still to and now I can't make it bigger or smaller by just, I can zoom in on it with the mouse, but in order to make it bigger or smaller I have to go into a new tool under the light bulb here. I have to go into translate view and use this tool, perspective move in. So if you click here and drag up, you move in, or you can drag down and move out. All right, there's the table. Put this back in Final Quality RenderWorks. What I would like for you to do is to turn in the Vectorworks file of the table. Don't lose it. Sometime later in the semester we're going to take this and turn it into a series of drawings, construction drawings, in case we wanted to build the table. But for today's project, I just want to see the table. So you can actually get rid of, if you want, all this other stuff. It's just there to help create the table. And there we have it. All right. Happy tabling.